kind of changed the entire way that I look at the world.
I think we ourselves are systems.
I don't see it as totally insane that I would just someday just do something totally unpredictable.
Yeah.
Just because YOLO, man. Systems.
Systems.
Hello, and welcome back to episode number 7 of the Philosophy of Everything podcast. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Eli.
And today we're going to talk about, we didn't have as much preparation for the episode today. We're going to riff, but it's a little bit thoughtful riff because these are things that have been sinking around in our brains for a little while, especially mine. And today we're going to talk about systems. It's not systems of equations. This is a way of conceptualizing the world that I've been thinking about recently, and I think it's kind of changed the entire way that I look at the world.
I think it's exciting.
All right.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone today at dinner, and I explained, because I had like a few evolutions of things, because at first I was thinking about levels, and then I was thinking about systems.
Okay.
And there may have been something in between, but I explained this whole systems thing at the end. The guy said, "You should write a book someday."
There we go.
So
it's good content.
if you're hooked. So basically the idea is that all of life is set up into different little systems. And so a big question that guides this is like, what system are you in? What system should you be in? And like, how do you navigate?
Yeah. Let's get some examples.
So a system is basically a setup in which there are goals, clearly defined goals, clearly defined bounds of that system, things that are important within that system, and then clear measurement of success and failure within that system. And so systems are really nice, especially very simple systems. So an example of a really simple system is like basketball. Basketball has a list of all of the rules, and it's like, I don't know, how long is the basketball rule book? Like maybe 10, 15 pages. Like for the real meaningful rules, it's like way less. You know, someone could explain basketball in like 5 minutes, and then you know everything you need to do. And then the skills are like a little bit harder to develop, obviously, like NBA players. But to be satisfied within that system is pretty easy, I would say, to like have a good time.
Yeah.
And for a person who's playing in the NBA, they are just like fully bought into that system being important. And that's nice. And then there's other systems that, and I think basketball is sports in general are kind of weird because they're like simple, but then like measuring success in them is harder.
Right.
And like getting good at them is harder. But another system that, and the reason I was thinking about systems in general was when I was thinking about my econ class. And so this is like probability. And this is basically just like math.
Okay.
Saying what is the probability of this given this. And you're just doing calculations, and you have to know the structure for how to think about this problem, and then you can solve it. And it's weird because I'm doing it, and it's like really giving me satisfaction to solve these problems. Right. But I know that these problems don't matter at all. And so I think this is what's so interesting about systems, is that our world is made up of all of these systems that if you're not bought into the system mattering, the systems are totally useless.
Right.
But if you're bought in, they're super valuable. And so we go throughout our life in these different systems. So we will like go to a math class and we learn the math rules. Right. And then we go through school, and there's a system that you're in where there's like the value of school is to get to the next grade, and then to get into college. And there's a whole apparatus that is built around that system, and most people buy into it. But what really troubles me, and I think a lot of people, is when you fall out of the system or you question the system. Right. And so this is something that happens to me a lot. I'm sure it happens to other people. I'm working on a film called The In-Between Times. And I think what it fundamentally is about is when you're in between systems and you're questioning the rules and the goals of a given system. Right. And so, for example, like capitalism is a system, and we live in a largely capitalist world. And I think a lot of people question that system. And I think it's easy to think of capitalism as a system, but it's like way harder to conceptualize all of the goals and the impacts of capitalism.
Right.
But I think just thinking about everything in the world as a system
Yeah.
is really valuable. It is given me a totally new glimpse or a new way of analyzing the world.
Interesting.
And I have a lot of questions moving forward of just like, what systems do I want to be in?
Right.
Are the systems that I'm currently in the systems that have goals that I'm aligned with?
Right.
And then I have like levels of like, is there a highest system that is like the most true or the best goals and the best outcomes?
Right.
Because within whatever system you can satisfy yourself and kind of live a fulfilled life unless you question the goals of that system, and then everything falls apart. And so this ultimately gets this like meaning of life question.
Right.
And like, what system do you want to be working towards for your life, such that when you get to the end, you don't feel like, wow, I've just spent the last 75 years being a day trader,
right,
because I was bought into the capitalist system,
right,
of just like money matters. And then I die, or I'm sitting on my deathbed, and it's like, wow, this system actually didn't matter.
Interesting. Yeah. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. Yeah, it actually ties really closely into something that I've been thinking a lot about, because we're talking about like framing the world in a certain way, and that is incentives.
Yes.
And I feel like, yeah, you mentioned it a little bit, but the idea that as at the moment when you question what you're doing within a system, you sort of become unhappy, or it loses meaning to you.
Right.
And I don't know that that's necessarily always true. I think if you do it at an existential level, to the point that you're talking about, where you're like, oh, wait a minute, like maybe in this system, like graduating high school is something that's valuable, but graduating high school isn't something that's valuable like on a much larger scale at all. Mm-hmm. And so I think a meaningful way to like be thoughtful about the systems that you're bought into is to think about it in terms of those incentives that I'm talking about. So it's like, instead of just mindlessly participating in something like school or like, you know, extracurriculars or whatever it may be that you're doing just for the sake of doing it, I have personally found some value in questioning them and being like, okay, like this is a good activity. And I feel like people do this inherently already, but I figured it would be a good comment to make. But I have more thoughts on the systems. But yeah, just reframing it in terms of incentives. So it's like, what am I getting out of this system or this interaction or whatever it may be? And I feel like a lot of the world is just framed in that way of like, what can I give or what can I get out of this thing, whatever it is.
Right.
So,
because the incentives drive all of your action.
Right. Yeah.
Within a system.
Exactly.
And so as much as you feel like you're kind of this independent actor in the world, you're ultimately subject to the systems that guide you and that you're brought into. And so, I mean, this is commonly brought up with people in capitalism again, like at the end of the day, I mean, this is the book that I'm reading as well. They're saying that a lot of the journalism, you say that journalism is kind of this maybe kind of fundamentally valuable concept, but then what really drives it, what journalism really stays afloat, we live in a capitalist system at the highest level, so it has to make money.
Right.
And so even if that means that it's about total nonsense, if it makes money, it survives.
Right.
And so it's really hard to be in a system if you don't feel like the values are aligned with yours.
Interesting.
But then you can't change it.
Right.
And so I think the two questions that I think systems make me think about, or that they get me thinking about, is like, is there an ultimate system that's the best? So like, is there an objective reality or objective morality?
Right.
Which is fundamentally like, is there an ultimate system that is correct?
Okay.
Or are we always just like figuring out one system to be in?
Right.
And so I think a question that I have for you is like, do you think you're in any systems that you're not fully bought into, but you enjoy the process of being in? Because I'm definitely in some.
Interesting. Yeah. I just had a comment before I answer that question. Okay. You talked initially about like the extent to which the rules are clearly defined in the system being tied to like the satisfaction or the benefit that we get from the system, like almost in a correlation sense where it's like the more clearly defined a system is, the more you get out of it or the more satisfying it is, or relating to the other point you had, the less you have to think about your buy-in to that system, the more you're free to just work within the system rather than step out of the system and question it.
Right.
And that's so interesting to me because I can definitely think of examples, and I think this follows in real life, where people become increasingly dissatisfied or increasingly challenged as rules break down in systems. So an example of that could be like relationships, where it's like you have an idea of what like the societally expected things are to do in the relationship, but then when it comes to like actually interacting with another person, it's like, okay, what is actually happening? Like, what do I do in this scenario, and it becomes potentially difficult because there's not like rigid rules like there might be for school or something like this.
Right.
And
exactly.
yeah, you see the same thing with kids when they get to college. So in high school or even prior to high school, it's very easy to just kind of skirt by just like doing what you're told and like doing the homework assignments that are given to you, and everything's clearly laid out. And then you get to college and all of a sudden
it's unclear what system to be in.
Yeah, it's almost impossibly overwhelming how many options, or rather how many systems there are that you have to confront.
That you can choose between.
Right. So
on certain levels, like you can't choose to be not capitalism. For the most part, but like you can choose that your life's mission and like the system that you choose to be in, and the goal of like what a good life looks like is to be a doctor.
Yes.
And you can say that my life is successful if I am a doctor.
Right. Yeah.
But then like how am I supposed to choose whether I'm a doctor or a lawyer or a homeless person or a social worker? And there's like all of these things, and so like
you need systems to answer those questions too.
Right. Yeah. And so like what system answers that? And is there a system at the top level that gives you like one satisfying answer to which one to pick? Because it seems like an impossible thing. You think there is?
I don't know. I think my answer to it would just be incentives, like I was saying earlier. Like
according to what system?
Exactly. And so this is what we have to flesh out, because what I was going to say earlier is like what you want to do is, I don't know that there necessarily is an answer, but I think you find the closest approximation to the answer when you're constantly checking what the incentives of the system that you're bought into are. So for example, like entrepreneurs, like they have a system that's very different from like a 9-to-5 worker type of thing, where they lose what we've been talking about with like the rigidly defined rules that give a lot of people happiness. And so those all get taken away from them, but they lose that incentive that people who like job stability or like, a consistent and guaranteed income or like a place to go every day, things like regularity that comes with that sort of system. The trade-off is, the potentially higher rewards that come with the higher risks, things like that. So you can trade between systems, but this might be a cop-out answer, but just maintaining an awareness of the things that you want to get out of your life. It's ultimately just a question of happiness. Like what are you trying to get out of your life, and then aligning your systems to fit that narrative instead of just staying in systems for the sake of it. And then, that I think kind of encompasses a lot of the factors you're talking about, in terms of one, like the clearly defined rules for a system. If you're a person that likes that and can operate in that sort of framework well, maybe it's better for you to have a job that aligns with that, or to like marry within your specific culture, or like do things in a very specific defined way. Or maybe the incentives you're looking for in life come from being like a creative person, like a journalist or something like this. And you get more buy-in. The other aspect that you were talking about a lot that I think is important is buy-in. Because if you're not on board with whatever the like ultimate mission is that you have in whatever systems you're participating in, you're ultimately just going to be unhappy.
Yeah. But so do you think you could buy into any system? Like, do you think any given person could be convinced to believe in the goals of a given system if like everyone in the society did it, or like all of the people that they respected did it?
because that's kind of the question you were bringing up earlier was like,
Because I think
are there
that's-
any systems that I'm currently bought into? Is that what your question was earlier? Because I realized I never
that's
answered
a different
it.
question.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I mean, I think what we're fundamentally trying to ask is like, how is a person supposed to decide what to do with their life?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I feel like what makes it so challenging, and I think I'm kind of found an answer to some extent tentatively,
Yeah.
but what I've struggled a lot with is how am I supposed to decide whether, I mean, even in something as simple as a major, like how am I supposed to decide if I'm to go into public policy or journalism?
Right.
Because journalism isn't like a flawless concept. Neither is public policy. They're both like limited and not like getting at ultimate truths in a certain way. And so it feels like it's an impossible struggle between these systems,
and you're always
that have like incomparable goals.
Like starkly different kinds of goals, you mean? Like just they're
like there's just no way there has to be some guiding system above them to make sense of which one is better.
Right.
And like, what is that system? And so what I've recently done is, and I think this is like potentially what a lot of people do, is they just do what feels the most right.
Yeah.
And I think like that might just, but I hate that because it's like not, it's not
a clear answer.
It's not rigorous.
It's exactly what we're talking about, where it's not a clearly defined system to give us. There's not a higher system that lacks that has the kind of structure that our lower systems have.
Right.
And so it's difficult to find.
And I think what makes this especially challenging is just the power of narratives. Mm-hmm. And I think narratives are such a confounder in system selection, because I transferred schools. We both are transfers here.
Right.
And a school is a system, you know? And so we're bought into a system.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that I could have stayed
I love this.
At LMU.
Yeah, this is a great way of framing it.
And
because
like I probably could have started being okay with it.
Yeah.
After a certain time, because you have to just like buy in.
Right.
And I think it's possible potentially to just like buy into your current situation.
Right.
But and like as I was applying to other schools, because like I used to study film and now I study public policy. And that's a departure.
It is.
You know? And like I still want to make films, and I've like written this story for myself. And the story came from me making applications. Like my first application was to Harvard, and they just ask you this question. It's like, why do you want to come here? Like, why are you transferring?
Right.
And every school does that. So I applied to 7 schools, and each time I wrote this narrative for why it made sense for me to, because I wasn't applying for film programs. I was applying for public policy programs or like government programs. And so that's a totally different system.
Yeah.
And I didn't know for sure. Like in a lot of ways, I didn't feel like that was necessarily like true to me.
Right.
But I kept writing this narrative that like that actually is who I am deep down, and like this is going to help me in a certain way. And over time, I just bought that narrative.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, you like you affirm the system in so many ways.
Yep.
You have to just like believe it mentally as well.
Right.
Because if you're not, you're just fighting the system.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, because you'll
be totally dissatisfied.
You're going to be totally dissatisfied because the system's not made for you.
Exactly.
And so I have now made this choice to be in a new structure, a new system. And so I'm just like, I'm going to buy in. I'm going to buy into the system. But like, is that how you should do it? And can you do that with anything? That's what I mean with with like, you can convince yourself of any system being the right system.
Right.
Like, I think it's possible with enough like thought and just like essay writing about why you want to be in the system.
Right.
Then you just like buy in. And it's like, sometimes I wonder like, should I, so like I'm trying to take journalism classes. Like I feel there's like twinges of doubt. Like, did I lie to myself? Did I delude myself into this being the correct system? I mean, yours was a lot more of
straightforward,
like you didn't switch majors until after you got here,
right?
But like that was a thing that could have happened either place,
right? So I don't have this back and forth,
right? But for me, like I'm in this total different major, and I'm like trying to affirm whether or not this is real.
This
and
is
like
really interesting.
what to do with that. And it's just like really hard to know how am I supposed to evaluate whether the system is right.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I love that you brought up the transferring schools example, because when you posed the question of can anyone buy into any system, I was gonna like just resort to like an immediate yes and say that you just have to, and that it is the people, you know, who are most involved in the system and are most dedicated to it that get the most out of it, because they're not doing this constant back and forth that you're talking about.
But you became disinvested in your first college.
Exactly.
And so did I.
And that's what I was going to say next is I was listening to a church talk once that stayed with me when I was like 17 or something. And the guy talking was like the most successful, and you can substitute happy for successful. The most successful people are the people who know when to pivot. So like the people who can recognize precisely the point when the system that they're a part of isn't aligning with their ultimate goals in life, and they switch immediately. Yeah. And not only do they switch, but they know what the values or desires or goals that they have in life are so well, such that they know exactly what direction to pivot to. And that's something that I've found particularly useful in my own life is the concept of pivoting, because when I'm at these sort of kind of junctions or like forks in the road where it's like, is that really the way I want to see my life going, or is it this way? It becomes really easy to just be like, okay, like what do I actually want in life? And then know that I'm going to get the most out of whatever that is by taking that route as fast as possible. Yeah. So that I can be in that route and bought in as long as possible, instead of stuck in this like limbo of in between two systems where I'm not bought into either. Right. And so I'm spread too thin. And it always sucks. And I think that also applies to the earlier question that you were asking me, which is like something along the lines of systems that I'm a part of that I don't necessarily feel bought into, or that I'm getting rewards out of. Conceptualizing it in that concept of like pivots has made it easier to say no to systems that are really tempting for me to stay a part of, because I know what I want to be spending my time doing. It really just comes down to priorities, but it makes it easier to be like, okay, like I know what this thing is and I don't like it, and so I'm going to pivot away and spend my time doing something I enjoy more. So anyway. Yeah.
I resonate with that a lot. I think that's kind of what you have to do. I was talking to someone recently, and they said basically, and like this whole podcast, like obviously we're young, we're in college, like we don't know everything. We got a comment on our first video that we posted, and they're like,
put it here.
It was like, stop. You guys are like 16.
You don't know anything.
You don't know anything. Go live life, then you can talk. And it's like, I think this could maybe be valuable to someone who's like our age, who's maybe at a similar place in life. And I think we've thought about it, and we're maybe hopefully at like a kind of good place with relation to it. But it's something that they can join the conversation with us. But I think it's like something that's valuable to people at all evolutions of their life. Like I think everyone can think about what systems they're part of.
Right.
But one piece of advice that I got that I really liked was that you're not going to know like what the ultimate system is in a lot of cases.
Right.
But you might know what the next best system is. And as long as you have a bias towards action, then you'll have a great life.
Right.
And you won't sit around, because like one of the things I have on my wall is like options. 1, complain. 2, make it better.
Yeah.
Would you just do something about it?
This is getting into something that I don't know if we've fully talked about yet either, but we don't just stay in the same systems our entire lives. It's almost like the systems in our lives are designed so that we can do them well enough to trade them for another system. You know what I mean? So like, it's easy to conceptualize with like school. Like you do school well enough so that you can do a different kind of school. You do a job well enough so that you can get promoted to a different system. And so maybe there's this aspect of it too, where it's like you buy into whatever current system you're in so well that you like maximize the parameters of that system. You do as well as you can in that system so that more doors are open to you to other systems later in life. I can attest to that being very true with my experiences previously when I was studying neuroscience and stats. I was very bought into that system, even though I'm no longer bought into that system.
Right.
And because of that, I was, doing maximally the things that someone in that system would do. I was doing research, I was doing like student journals, like all of these things. And because of that, I had opportunities that opened doors to new systems, which actually turned out to be entirely different systems.
Yeah.
But I could switch to them as a result of my buy-in to earlier,
right, because
call it lesser systems. Because lesser, not in the sense of some systems are higher ultimately, but lesser in the sense of what I wanted before is different than what I want now. And I feel more assured of what I want now. So they're lesser for me. So, but yeah.
Right. And it takes understanding really what are like the fundamental incentives and goals and expected actions within a system to understand whether you want to be a part of that system.
Exactly.
And so like a thing that I think about that with is like business news.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe long term I'm not going to stay with business news.
Right.
But I'm like totally bought in, or like I've worked over the summer for the last year.
Yeah.
Totally bought in business news.
Yes.
And now I like understand the game.
Yep.
Like I understand what the incentives are around business news. I understand what stories get written about business news. And so I have like the things that I like about it and the things that I'm not as happy about with that.
Right.
But you have to exist within a system to really get it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, it almost seems like if you deceive yourself a little bit of your buy into a particular system, like you say you're not going to be interested in business news forever, but I wonder if you like convinced yourself that you were, like business news was the end, that would increase your buy-in to the point that you get more out of it type of thing. You know what I mean? Like, because I talk about getting the most out of systems in order to like move on or kind of jump ship later. But when I think about the systems that I've maximally, gotten the most out of, and I'm 20 years old, so I've had fairly few of them, I haven't had that conception of like, oh, I'm just doing this so I can like jump ship later, or I'm doing this as a means to something else. Right. I always, at least when I get the most out of systems or am the most satisfied within systems, it's when I'm fully bought into the system as an end in itself. Yeah. And so... Yeah, that's I'm curious.
And so then is it just like a gut thing? Like how do you're never in any systems that you're not fully bought into?
No, I definitely am. But
because you've like left them.
Exactly. That's where it comes back to pivoting. But that's kind of a different thing. That's like a practicality thing where it's like when you recognize that you're not satisfied in a system, you switch. But prior to that, you should be at least bought in to a system, ideally. But I definitely can relate to other aspects that you're talking about too, where it's like I'm in this system, but I don't know if I should be doing something else like right now. Like that's a very real thing for so many people, like all the time. Like it's just everything, like how we spend our time every day.
Do you think that you can decide what the fundamental, like the ultimate values are? Or do you just pick systems based on gut?
Okay.
Because I feel like
that's what it was.
At the end of the day, the systems that work for me are the ones that just align with my gut.
Yeah.
Which I hate that kind of, but it also like feels good.
Yeah.
It feels good because my gut just tells me so.
Right.
And so it's like not a problem. But I hate it because I don't feel like I can just find the ultimate system.
Yeah.
And do you feel like you go on similar like gut things, or do you have a list of values? Because I do also have a list of things that I believe and that I do not believe.
Yeah, those are good. I don't know. I think it is interesting though, because I can relate to the idea that the things that I've done, like it's almost kind of path of least resistance. Like I believe in determinism, so this kind of gets funky, but like I do the things that make the most sense for me to do in any situation, you know what I mean? Instead of trying to push back against a system so much, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And in that sense, I'm able to get more out of it. But yeah, I really do feel like I just like do things based on my gut, you know what I mean? Which might be problematic, you know what I mean? Because we were talking with another transfer student the other day. You were asking everyone what the biggest question was.
Oh yeah.
And his answer was very similar to mine, and I imagine a lot of other people, which was, I want to have the answer to essentially this question, but on an individual level, which is like, what are the decisions that I need to make, like big ticket decisions, and I guess that comes with smaller decisions that lead to those. But what are the things that I need to be doing in my life that make me the most happy at the point that I die? Yeah. And all the way leading up to that.
Yeah.
And he framed it in the way of like, what if it wasn't Stanford? Like, what if I needed to drop out right now and do something totally different? That is like not at all aligned with your gut feeling or the path of least resistance.
Right.
But it very well could be the answer or the system that works.
Right.
And so it's such a strange balancing act of, on the one hand, having to live in ignorance of all the things that are going on around you and all the potential, it's the paradox of choice, or like whatever psychology term that is, where the more choices you're confronted with, the less satisfied you are. And so, you just have to go based on your gut, like what the best one is, and not question it. And then maybe you'll be happy.
Yeah. But then your gut, but what really challenges me about the gut question is like, what informs my gut? Is my gut just like a thing that just exists separate from the world and all of my experiences?
Yeah.
And do I just like fundamentally way back there, just like love film? Or is it something that I've just like done over time and like slowly developed this desire? Or like with wanting to transfer, is it something that slowly I throw in these words like, hey, you want to do this,
right?
You want to do this, and then slowly my gut says, yeah, you really do want to do this, even though like I only kind of did at the beginning.
Interesting.
And so
I think there's some aspect of that too, where it's like, you keep talking about this, and so I hate to like just circle it back around, but I feel like the more we tell ourselves that we're bought into something, like the more we are, you know what I mean? Like, think about when you first had an interest in film. Like, it wasn't like the most important thing to you, but then as you made one video and another video and another video, it like became a part of your identity. And so like we almost have the option to like choose those things. I want to hear what you're going to say, actually.
Well, so that's what I was talking about the other day with like, what if the right thing to do though is a massive change?
Right.
And it's like, how likely are you to really do just a completely 180?
Right.
Like pretty low.
No.
Like the people that we see do 180s in life, we see them as like total crazies.
Yeah.
You know? But like, what if like, I think we're so limited by what's reasonable.
Yes.
You know? And it's like, what we live once though. And so like, should we be limited by that? Should we be limited by this gut check that like slowly builds upon one another? And so like we slowly amalgamate what our values are? Or what if like one day we're like, actually, I think I should totally drop out of this because none of this means anything.
Right.
And the only thing that means anything is like being a good person for other people. And so me sitting at school, just being in the ivory tower is actually a total waste of my time and a total delusion of importance.
Right.
And it's just societally propped up, but it's actually totally worthless.
Interesting.
And you should go out and just help feed homeless people, or just like go write philosophy, or any other random thing that's a total departure from everything that you've built up your life for.
Right.
And I think this is maybe something that happens, that over time people, because of this desire to be reasonable, is that over their life, people just buy in more and more to their system, such that they just stop. They become less and less likely to be doing that.
Right.
And they don't even consider whether or not they should jump systems.
Right.
They're just like, I'm so far bought into the system that my whole identity would crumble if I left.
Exactly.
And is that a way to live?
I think it is. I think it has to be for so many people. Because,
but do you think it should be? Is that a good way to live? Because it's like maybe a stable way to live, but it's like it's a sad way to think that, or it's a sad reality if we think that everyone, like all of the people who we think are doing bad things in the world, and like are deluded on what's true and what's real, and maybe like whatever insert thing, they're just like incapable of changing their worldview because it would hurt them too bad, or they perceive it as being too much of a change to their worldview, and they'd have to change their whole identity. And so this is like what we were talking about with vegetarian and veganism like a while back in that episode, that you guys have never seen.
Yeah. It happened.
It happened.
Real news, folks.
But like, imagine you're living in a society where everyone around you says you got to eat meat, and you're going to be the ridicule. You're going to be the ridicule of the town.
Yeah.
If you're like a vegetarian, it's like, what are
Yeah.
you talking about, a vegetarian? I'm not marrying you.
Right.
If you're a vegetarian. And
Yeah.
so people buy into the system so much that everything around them is just the system.
Right.
And so how do you do, like, should you always be able to just leave a system? Could you?
There's so much content there.
Because I feel like someday I want to just totally abandon, like, I don't see it as totally insane
Right.
to predict that I would just someday just totally do a 180,
Yeah.
do something totally unpredictable,
Yeah.
just because YOLO, man.
Yeah. It's why people have midlife crises.
Yeah.
Because they are so bought into something and then they have a sudden realization that maybe it's not them.
Yeah.
And what I mean by maybe it's not them is like, I think the answer to this is I think we ourselves are systems. And I think as we live, we pick up additional things and roles and experiences that inform what kind of system we are, to the point that making these kind of major 180s that you're talking about is a betrayal of our system that makes us unhappy. So you know what I mean? So like for me, someone who's interested in neuroscience, but realize that I'm not so interested in neuroscience, someone who really likes philosophy, it would make no sense for me to tomorrow switch my major to music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And maybe I get some sort of happiness from that. Like, you know what I mean? But it's not the kind of system that I am.
Members of systems, we also are systems ourselves
that have to align with ourselves.
That's a way of
yeah
describing identity as a system.
Right. And so right now there's a lot more plasticity to my system just as a function of being young and having fewer experiences to inform what kind of system I am. And so there's a lot more of this pressure that we keep talking about where it's like we want to make sure that we're building our identities and choosing the right things along a path in life that makes us ideally the most happy. But I don't think it's always the best idea to totally betray the things that you've built up as part of who you are for so long, because it's either, and I don't think it's a good idea for one, but I also think it's near impossible. Like if you look at people who were raised religious, for example, and they are 80 years old and they are still like diehard Orthodox Catholics, for example. Yeah. There is no world in which you're changing their minds. Yeah. Or for me, I think if I had been presented with arguments for veganism 20 years later, I just wouldn't have given it another thought because Are
you still vegan?
I'm still vegan.
Yeah.
Hi guys, I'm still vegan. There was more I was going to say with this. So there's that kind of 180 that I think you're talking about in terms of flipping your life around. But there's also a question of like safety. And I think that's why so many people don't make the other kind of 180 that I'm thinking about. That's less about identity and more about success. And this might be a little bit of a broken record, but just the amount of people that know they want so much more than they do,
than they have,
yeah. But just can't, as a result of their circumstances or their desire to feel secure in a system, break out of that. Because like you were saying earlier, the people who make those kind of 180s like are not the ideal person in life. You know what I mean? Because
unless they end up really successful unless they're
system. The 1%, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like for every 100 people that make this 180, one of them becomes Elon Musk. Actually, for every like 1 billion, you know what I mean? Yeah. Mark Manson, he's the author of Subtle Art of Not Giving a Swear Word. He has a video where he talks about this. He's like, the amount of things that have to go right in order for you to succeed in this kind of way are like insane. Like you have to have a contrarian idea of what you want to do in life that's so different from what everybody else is doing and so different from the way you were living your life previously. And it has to be correct. Like it has to be, it has to be a book about systems that hasn't been written yet that everyone wants to read. You know what I mean? And in the same way that you have to be entirely bought in to the safe systems, which are like school or like a safe job, like a typical job, you have to be equally, if not more so, bought into that kind of thing, which is even less secure, which makes it even more difficult, which has even less clearly defined, you do this and you do this and you do this and you get success. Right. You have to be even more bought into that thing with so much less incentive to buy into it and so much less accountability in order for it to go well. And so to the people, it's so hard because, you know, I'm tempted to like do that sometimes where I'm like, oh, I just have this idea and I just want to dedicate all my time to it. If that's you and you like feel like you're there, it might be like it might be worse for you to like start questioning the system like we're talking about and consider a pivot back to something safe because of how much it demands. But anyway, kind of some side thoughts there.
Yeah, it's a weird evaluation to think that you're going to live in a more limited way because you don't want the discomfort of leaving your existing structure. But I feel like, and I think just at the end of the day, for me, it feels like I just have, like, everything seems just so arbitrary.
Right.
And like it seems not arbitrary in certain ways, but just the random things that have come to exist seem strange in a lot of ways. And I could like expand upon that. I don't know, like what's an example of just like even like I don't know. Like,
yeah, I don't it's a real thing.
But it's just like to think that I'm going to live my whole life because this was just like the path of least resistance. Yeah. And this was just like what happened to exist. And now I'm going to die. And that was my one life.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I did it just because it was the mold that was made before me. And I didn't just like think outside of that mold. And that's just like so challenging. And so that's why I think one day I may just jump ship and swim on my own. That's what my brother's doing. My brother's quitting his job. He and his wife are quitting their jobs and are going to exit the system, travel the world, see what happens.
Right.
And my dad was not
soaked
on that. And my dad may be more bought into the conventional system of life.
Right.
I feel like sometimes you gotta just jump ship. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You're gonna die anyway.
Yeah, I think I'm increasingly convinced of that because like when you think about the alternative, like you're saying, like we get one of these.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I know.
It reminds me a lot of The Myth of Sisyphus by Camus, where he's like, the answer to this total absurdity of life, like of this being it and nothing like inherently mattering and it's all just arbitrary, like you're talking about, is to like rebel back against it and like live fully in spite of it. And so yeah, I don't know, like it's just so hard because like so much of our life is just the mundane stuff. You know what I mean? Right. Like it's not very much of our life comprises that kind of rebelling, like going off and doing something crazy.
Right. And no matter what you do, it might end up like that because you still have to like get food and
exactly
figure out your way. But
I like it.
I think
we need more.
You got to think about the system you're in. And if you want to jump ship, what system are you going to?
Yeah.
Let us know. Keep thinking. Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's it. Keep thinking.
Okay. Keep thinking. Till next time.